Hello, welcome to yet another edition of our class in Literature in English. Today we are going to be treating one of the recommended non-African plays, and that is put forward by the popular William Shakespeare, titled Othello. Now this play is strictly a tragedy in every sense of the word because it shares every feature of the Aristotelian precepts of a modern Western tragic play. Now, Othello clearly begins when we saw the altercation between Brabantio and Othello, who had eventually, behind the approval of the father, Brabantio got married to the lady Desdemona. This information got to Brabantio, the senator, through Roderigo and Iago, of which Othello was eventually summoned in the Venetian assembly in order for him to explain why this matrimony had to be assigned without the approval of the father. Eventually, in fact, we saw that Roderigo or Brabantio, the senator, had put forward a claim that Othello had bewitched his daughter, Desdemona. Now, Desdemona and Othello appeared before the Venetian assembly in order for them to refute this claim. The lady Desdemona had said clearly that she got married to the Moor out of sheer love and passion and not because of his father's claim. Now we can see that Othello was a Moor, a very wonderful man in valor. He was a successful man in battle, and it was as a result of these war exploits that we saw the lady Desdemona falling deeply in love with the Moor. Now eventually the play moves where we saw that the Turks had arrived the island, the Cyprus island, and then we saw that Venice and its assembly had assigned this tax for the Moor, Othello, in order to ensure that the Turks do not take over this island. Fortunately for them, before they arrived at the Cyprus island, we had heard news clearly that a very serious tempest had dismantled the Turks, the ships of the Turks, clearly. That's from Turkey. And then we saw that they had arrived the island safely with no physical war to fight. Unfortunately, there was a serious war of envy and malice which was about to engulf. Now, eventually, we saw that Othello, who was the commander of the Venetian army, had promoted Michael Cassio to the role and level of lieutenant orderly. All this was to the serious jealousy and dissatisfaction of Iago. As a result of this, Iago felt jealous for Cassio and decided to plot a ploy that will make sure it ends up in the death of Cassio, Desdemona, or Othello, or even a combination of all of them. Now, having a very good knowledge of human nature, he understood clearly that if he succeeds in making Othello jealous of Cassio over Desdemona, this will eventually lead to an execution of his plan. So he began to work towards this. It was very obvious that Cassio and the lady Desdemona had a wonderful fraternity on a casual basis. Now, on the night they had arrived clearly at the Cyprus island, we had seen that the army were rejoicing because they had no more physical battle to fight. But before the Moor got to bed, he instructed Michael Cassio to ensure clearly that none of the soldiers get drunk in order for them not to ensure in a fight. But as we saw, Iago goiled clearly on Cassio for him to get drunk, and then as well as Roderigo, whom he motivated in order for Roderigo to fight with Cassio. And then this actually got a serious attention from the Moor, who came out and demoted Cassio. Cassio then actually felt very remorseful. He felt bad that out of carelessness of drunkenness, he had to be demoted from such an envious position of lieutenant orderly to the commander. But in order for him to be reinstated, Iago advised him to get around the lady Desdemona, that is the wife of the Moor, so that the lady would talk to the Moor in order for him to be reinstated. It was in this process that Iago actually got to make Othello feel that there was an illicit affair between the lady and his former lieutenant orderly. He actually assumed the role of lieutenant, or let me say an illegal advisor to the Moor, and then trying to make him feel that there is something going on between them. Now, there was a point in the play where Iago actually had to prove his claim to the Moor by illegally stealing the handkerchief through his wife Emilia from the room of the Lady Desdemona and placed it in the chambers of Cassio. This handkerchief was a gift of love from the Moor to his wife, but eventually he plotted this scene in order to make sure that the Moor saw Cassio with this handkerchief, and then concluding that it was an exchange of love gift from his lady to his lover. At that point, we saw that the Moor, the commander, that is Othello, had concluded to kill his wife out of jealousy, of which he eventually did. So, having successfully killed his wife, his innocent wife, on the grounds of jealousy, or in the reason that she was having an illicit affair with Cassio, he had also contracted Iago to ensure that Michael Cassio will be assassinated. Michael Cassio then handed over this assignment to Roderigo, who was supposed to ensure that Michael Cassio is assassinated. Unfortunately for Roderigo, Cassio escaped this assassination attempt, killing Roderigo in the process. Now, eventually, as the play unfolded, it was discovered in the pockets of the assassin that there were several notes that was exchanged between Roderigo and Agio, who were plotting out the whole scenario. On this note, it was discovered that Michael Cassio and the dead lady Desdemona were innocent of this accusation, and Iago was found culpable for the crime. It was to the serious disappointment and heartbreak of Othello, who had innocently killed his wife. As a result of this, we saw clearly that Iago was found guilty of this treacherous crime. He was to face a very serious and painful death, and eventually we saw that Othello, out of frustration, committed suicide and died as a result. So we can see that as a result of this, we saw that before this happened, there was a command from Venice that the Moor needs to return, and of course leaving the army under the care of Cassio. But before Ludovico brought the letter and the unfolding events, we saw that the tragedy kept unfolding, and then it led to the death of the major characters in the play. Now let's look at the characters in the play as we will be explaining further. The first is Othello. Othello is the Moor in the play. He is the commander of the Venetian army. Of course, he actually earned the love of the Lady Desdemona, who happens to be the daughter of one of the senators in Venice, Brabantio. And then we saw that because of the stories of war exploits and breathtaking escapes, we saw again that the Lady Desdemona decided to marry secretly the Moor against the advice of his father. Now, it is very notable to mention that Roderigo was one of the suitors of the lady, but she did not love Roderigo. Rather, she preferred to fall in love with Othello. We saw eventually that Othello got jealous of Cassio through the tricks of Iago, and then as a result of jealousy, Othello killed his wife, the Lady Desdemona, innocently, and having found that this murder was committed on this ground, he committed suicide as a whole. Now, the next character on our list is Iago. Iago is the mole in the play. He is treacherous, he is disloyal, he is clearly an opposite of a devout and committed citizen. He is an opposite of a patriot. He actually plans the downfall and causes the confusion and the death of all the innocent people in the play. He is to face a very painful death as a result of this high level of unpatriotism and disloyalty. We saw that Iago actually got jealous of Cassio because he felt that Cassio did not deserve the promotion as put forward by the Moor. He felt that he is the one that fights the war. He is the one that practices soldiership. But Cassio was only an administrative officer, and in the end, he earned the promotion. So as a result, he felt jealous and decided to plan the schemes that led to all the conflicts that we experience in the play. The third character on the list is Michael Cassio. Cassio is the lieutenant orderly to the commander of the Venetian army, that is Othello. He is actually a very subtle person, very intelligent. He is an administrative soldier who is always at the company of the Lady Desdemona on the approval of the Moor. Clearly, we saw that he was a very notable and popular soldier who was always on the administrative cadre of the army. And then we saw again in the play that Cassio earned this promotion strictly on merit. And then as a result of some levels of trickery and carelessness, he was demoted out of anger, but eventually was accused of having an illicit affair with the wife of the Moor. And then this clearly led to the problems in the play. He actually escaped an assassination attempt by Roderigo, and he was the only living major character that was left in the play. Now, the next character is the Lady Desdemona. The Lady Desdemona is the noble wife of Othello, who happens to be the Moor and the commander of the Venetian army. This woman has an undiluted love, affection, and loyalty for her husband. Clearly, he understands that Othello's attitude is motivated out of jealousy, but she was unable to know clearly who had caused her husband to behave in such an unacceptable way by her. Clearly, this woman dies an innocent death because she was accused of having an treacherous activity illicitly with Michael Cassio. We also saw again in the play that the husband was accused by her father, Brabantio, of having used some black magic or charm to win the love of the lady. But the lady spoke boldly in the Venetian assembly, clearly refuting that claim and saying that her love is natural. Desdemona is an epitome of a wonderful lady and a good woman. The next character is Brabantio. Brabantio is a senator in the Venetian army. He is the father of the Lady Desdemona. He is also the one who clearly accused Othello of using a charm to win the love of his daughter. He actually summons this Moor to defend his claim, of which we saw. Brabantio clearly is a typical and popular influential Venetian who plays his role as a senator. Upon this accusation, he clearly admits that it would have been better for him to have a male child than to have the Lady Desdemona. He felt absolutely disappointed that upon all the suitors that were lining up for the hand of his daughter in marriage, she actually chose to marry the Moor, that's Othello. So Brabantio is a citizen and an influential senator. We have Roderigo as the last on our list. Roderigo is one of the suitors of the Lady Desdemona. As a matter of fact, Roderigo is presented as a very gullible character. He is used clearly by Iago in manipulating and perpetrating his schemes. It was actually in the company of Roderigo and Iago that the news of the secret marriage between Othello and Desdemona was divulged to Brabantio. Eventually, we also saw that Roderigo was the one Iago used to stage a fight between himself, between Roderigo, of course, and Cassio, which eventually led to the demotion of the latter. Of course, we saw clearly that if not for Montana, that's the governor of Cyprus Island, who intervened in the fight, it would have possibly led to the death of one of them. Roderigo, yet again, was used as an assassin by Iago to assassinate Michael Cassio on the command of the Moor, clearly. So Roderigo is always gullible to Iago. But the big question is, why was Roderigo obeying the commands of Iago to carry out these plans? The answer is, Roderigo, being one of the suitors of the Lady Desdemona, never stopped loving the lady. So Iago was always using that as a leverage against him, believing that on the death of the Moor, Roderigo will now become a legally married husband to the lady. It was on this ground that Roderigo was always engaging in these illicit and illegal assignments assigned to him by Iago with the hope that he will eventually marry the lady in the end. Now let us look at the themes in the play. Now one of the themes, as we are going to consider in the play, is the theme of jealousy. Now, as we had explained, jealousy clearly is instituted on the character of Othello. Now, it is upon this that Iago had known the schemes and the weaknesses of top-ranking people in that career. He understood that if he succeeds in making Othello jealous of Cassio and perhaps the lady Desdemona as well, it will lead to the death of all of them. And he succeeded in making that happen. And of course, it actually led to the death of these people. The second theme is the theme of treachery. Treachery there simply means disloyalty and unpatriotism. And this theme is strongly featured in the character of Iago. Iago is one of the soldiers of the Moor. But clearly, instead of showing loyalty and patriotism, of which is expected of a typical soldier, Iago was unpatriotic and treacherous. Rather, this eventually led to all the conflicts that we saw in the play. Instead of Iago to show loyalty and respects the decision of his superior, he rather secretly discountenanced and opposed these decisions, making negative and evil plans to outturn them. Then, treachery as a theme is not quite different from the theme of betrayal, of which we saw clearly that Iago betrayed the trust of his master Othello. Now, eventually in the play, we saw that there was an unholy union or friendship that existed between Iago and Othello. Othello seemed to be so trusting on this Iago. In fact, there was an aspect in the play that he called Iago his loyal friend. That was ironical, not knowing that this person he's labeling as his friend is planning the downfall of all of them. So he betrayed the trust of soldiership. He betrayed the trust and patriotism of which he was expected to show as a soldier. The last theme is the theme of death. Death is a notable theme in the play because this is also one of the typical and topical issues, as always notable in every Aristotelian tragic play. People in every Aristotelian tragic play, of which is the canon, will always end up dying. We saw a lot of deaths in the play. We saw the death of the tragic hero, which is Othello. We saw the death of the lady Desdemona. We saw the death of Iago. We saw the death of Emilia. We saw the death of many top characters in the play, and of which is a typical feature of every tragic play in the Aristotelian canon. So death constitutes one of the major themes in the play. Now let's consider these questions. Othello kills Desdemona because the former is jealous, because the former's race is insulted, because the latter is a witch, and D, because the former is wicked. That question is coined from JAMB UTME 2016, question 7. Now, when we talk about the former and later in this context, basically former means one of two things. The later means the second of two things. Former is the first among two things. Later is the second between two things. So Othello kills Desdemona because the former. So former there means Othello, because Othello is jealous, and that becomes the answer. Clearly, the answer is contained in option A. The reason Othello kills Desdemona is purely out of jealousy. Now let's consider the second question. Brabantio is opposed to the relationship between Othello and Desdemona because A, he prefers Iago. B, Othello is a Moor. C, Roderigo woos her first. And D, Desdemona is too young. Clearly, that question is coined from JAMB UTME 2016, question 8. And the correct answer is contained in option B. Brabantio is opposed to the relationship between Othello and Desdemona because Othello is a Moor. A Moor is a race, a sub-race that is originating from Africa. So because of this racial prejudice, he felt that it is not Othello of which his daughter was supposed to marry. Now, let's consider the next. The play is staged at A. Liverpool Stadium, B. Manchester Stadium, C. Whitehall Place Stadium, and D. London Theatre. That question is coined from JAMB UTME 2017, question 7. And the correct answer is contained in option D. Is first staged in London Theatre. Let's consider this last one. It's a quotation. All's one good faith. How foolish are our minds. If I do die before thee, prithee, shoot me in one of those same shits. The plea in the excerpt above is made by A. Desdemona to Emilia, Othello to Iago, C. Iago to Emilia, and D. Cassio to Bianca. Now clearly that question is coined from JAMB UTME 2017, question 8, and correct answer is contained in option A. That play was made by Desdemona to Emilia. Now that's all about Othello. I am very pleased yet again to host you in this class, and I expect you to watch out for our next video. Thank you very much.